Systems of Theory (TS) is a specific branch of a general system theory (TGS). The TGS arose from the work of a German biologist Ludwig von Bertalanffy, published between 1950 and 1968. The TGS does not seek to solve problems or attempt practical solutions, but to produce conceptual theories and formulations that can create application conditioned in empirical reality. In a preliminary work in the file of General Theory of Systems, Kohler pursued the postulate of a theory of systems aimed at developing the more general properties of inorganic systems compared to organic systems. To a certain extent, to meet this demand left the theory of open systems. The work of Locke, 1925, was the closest to the goal. The truth is that Locke dealt with the general concept of systems without being restricted as Kohler to systems of physics. Interested in the problems of populations rather than in the biological problems of individual organisms, he conceived the communities as systems without noticing in the individual sum of cells. However, the need and feasibility of a system approach was not evident until recently. It resulted from necessity of the fact and the mechanism of isolable paths and the meristic treatment were insufficient to face practical problems posed on modern technology. Bertalanffy advocated an organismic conception in biology that emphasized the consideration of the organism as whole or system and sought the main objective of biological science in the discovery of its principles of organization at its various levels.
Today we're going to look at how we can see organizations as systems. Ludwig von Bertalanffy and J.G. Miller established the foundations of general systems theory in the 1960s and 70s, and researchers in the organizational studies area imported the systems metaphor of the living biological organism and the key terms that go along with it to pursue a richer understanding of how organizations worked. In 1966, for example, Daniel Katz and Robert Kahn published The Social Psychology of Organizations that applied systems theory's concepts to organizational life. I think it's most helpful to see systems as an alternative perspective at the time. Classical management era of organizational studies was really the dominant view, and it saw organizations as machines, and that was the main way to view life in organizations for many decades. The goal of that classical management school of thought was they wanted efficiency, productivity, and control. They were looking for the one right way, or as Frederick Taylor said, the one best way to do every single task in the organization. And so when systems theory came along, it was really a whole nother way to view life at work. A systems approach looks at the whole organism, not the little pieces of the machine, but how it all fits together as a whole. So the goal of the systems approach is to describe and explain how organizations work. They don't have a control mindset. And they wanted to pursue multiple ways to accomplish the various goals of the organization. They're not looking for the one right way. So I think it's best to understand the systems approach as a counterpoint or an alternative or even a reaction against the classical management era and school of thought. So in an organization, we have three main parts. We have a set of inputs where we have resources, information that is needed to supply the organizational system. We also have the processes or throughputs. That's all the activity within the system that we need to do to accomplish work. And then we have the outputs. Those are the outcomes, the products, the services created or delivered by the organization. Typical pizza place, for example, has inputs that you might expect: the people that are doing the work, the food, the ovens, refrigerator, pizza boxes, and all the other materials. And then you have your processes or throughputs where you make the dough, you cut the vegetables, mix the sauce, answer the phones, take the orders, make the pizza, delegate the tasks, lots of work in a pizza place. And then you have outputs, which are hopefully pizza delivered to happy customers. You have a profit for the shop. Hopefully your employees are getting good paychecks. You put the trash in the dumpster and all the other kinds of waste material. Those are also considered outputs of a system. And those are the three main parts. So systems here are clearly open. That's one of the main concepts in systems theory. They're open to their environment. And when we say environment, we don't just mean things like the weather. Of course, we're not excluding that weather, but the environment more broadly. So you have permeable boundaries where information comes in and out. Resources flow both in and out of those boundaries around the organization. And you have an exchange with the environment that's not just happening, but it's essential for the health of the system. So constantly things are coming in and moving out of the system to keep it healthy, to keep it functioning properly. And your environments that you're in are very unpredictable. You can't say for certain exactly what's going to happen with competitors and exactly what's going to happen in the future. So you have the leaders that are scanning the environment. They're called boundary spanners, and they're looking at the environment to see what the vendors are up to, what the customers are looking to do, what the competition is up to, where the general economy is headed. And they're keeping an eye through environmental scanning on all of the things that are happening in and around the organization to make better decisions. Holism is an important part of the systems approach, where systems are viewed as a whole, not simply as a collection of separate pieces. So you wouldn't view yourself, your whole body, as just a collection of cells. You're much more than that. Another way to say it is a system is greater than the sum of its parts. Some people use the term synergy here, which has a bad rap in some circles. Those parts of the system are interdependent and they interact through mutual feedback processes. So feedback is a dynamic process where the pieces of the system of that whole are all interconnected. Interdependence is another leading concept in this systems approach, where organizations are in a dynamic and interconnected relationship with their environment. For example, there are subparts within the system that are also interrelated. They're not isolated. The organization is not simply isolated and plopped down in a community. It's connected to that community, and the pieces, the parts within that organization are also interconnected. They're made up of interconnected subsystems. So you have a whole organization, and then you have, let's say, some major departments within that organization. And then within those departments, you have work teams that are also interrelated and overlapping. So changes to one part of the system directly or indirectly influence other parts. For example, if you had some people call in sick on one team, then other people in the organization would be at least indirectly affected and have to maybe pick up some of that work. Maybe you hire a whole bunch of people in one part of the organization, and everybody's going to have to get on board and train them and adapt when you add people. So everything is interconnected. All the parts either directly or indirectly influence the other parts. Systems also have goals, but the goals, again, are not like classical management goals of finding the one best way. Goals are contingent and negotiated. So that means it depends on what exactly the organization is facing and where it's going. It'll have to adapt along the way as the situation develops. Equifinality is a powerful concept to describe how systems people approach goals. The first part of equifinality is that there's no one best way to organize. And this, again, flies directly in the face of people like Frederick Taylor, who are looking for the one best way. The second part of equifinality, however, makes the concept that much more powerful, that all ways of organizing are not equally effective. So what they're not saying is, look, there's no one best way, so let's throw it all out. What they're saying is there may be not one single way to do everything. However, there are some ways that are better than others. You just can't always know ahead of time as you pursue your goals what those several good ways are. However, for example, if you want to travel from New York City on a road trip to Los Angeles, you cannot find one route at all times that's the one best way, depending on weather, time of year, traffic patterns, road conditions. You will have to look for a variety of ways to get there in that specific case. However, they're not all the same. For example, if your travel companion, your co-pilot says, let's go from New York City to Los Angeles on a road trip, but let's go all the way up through Canada first, you're probably going to say that's not one of the better ways to do things. Feedback is also an important part of the systems approach. We have negative feedback that seeks to correct or reduce deviations in these systems processes to reestablish a steady course back in the direction of the system's goals. That's negative feedback that corrects. Then you have positive feedback that changes or grows the system in desired ways that amplify and enhance the system's current processes. So you have positive feedback that gets you going in the direction you want to go faster. However, if you think about it, just like with kids, you can reward the wrong kinds of behavior accidentally. So positive feedback in this sense is not necessarily always good for a system. You might have a boss that's screaming and yelling at everybody. And if that boss gets a promotion, that might be seen as positive feedback that would then amplify that boss's approach. And maybe the people around that boss would start to scream and yell at everybody too, because they're seeing that that's what's being rewarded. And then eventually people would have to give some negative feedback to say, hey, let's tone that down. We don't want to be like that, to get the system back on track. Entropy is a term that is central to the way systems work. It's one that I think adds a lot of depth to this approach, and that is systems tend to run down. They tend to deteriorate and move toward disorganization. So left on their own, systems will run down. For example, if you just left your apartment and didn't clean it, and you're still living in it, but you left it on its own and didn't do the dishes, didn't pick up, it would only take a day or two before it looked like a completely run-down, deteriorated system. And that's why we seek more balance. There's energy, resources, information coming into the system to help it reach homeostasis or equilibrium. Those are both ways to say balance. So you have a whole lot of effort and work and time put into maintaining a balance in the system so it doesn't on its own run down. In the same way, if you stopped showering, your body is a system, you stopped bathing, brushing your teeth, you would start to be noticed by your friends. They would say, wow, you're not maintaining. You have to do that. Otherwise, you're going to continue to deteriorate and fall apart. Systems theory has not necessarily been used in a lot of very specific ways as it is. It was more like an opening, an open door to lead us to a whole other set of precise theories to look at organizations. So for example, complex adaptive systems, or chaos theory as it's sometimes called, was built upon the foundation of systems theory. Learning organizations is another school of thought that came out of systems thinking. And of course, Carl Weick's research on loosely coupled systems is a direct outshoot of the systems point of view on organizations. So systems theory has provided a powerful set of concepts and a vocabulary and a whole way of thinking about organizations that is a direct counterpoint to the classical management era school of thought.